Thank you, Jaikumar sir, and good evening to everyone present here. On behalf of ITPI Kerala Regional Chapter, I welcome you all to the 6th session of the Web Talk series towards better planning and implementation. Over the course of the past, say, 1.5 years of the pandemic, ITPI Kerala has moved online, been conducting a series of web talks towards better planning and implementation. We are at the second leg of the series and have had very interesting and wonderful sessions by eminent personalities from across the world. Some of us are our own members and some of us from outside, panning the planning fraternity, professionals, academicians, and students. On that note, I also sincerely hope everyone who's here and their families are staying safe and healthy. For officially starting the proceedings of the day, I invite onto the virtual dais Kerala Regional Chapter Chairman, Shri Jayakumar sir, Treasurer, Shri Kiran Chand Vayat, Secretary, Shri Nagul Devan, today's session moderator, Shri Rajesh PN, and today's chief guest, Shri MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY, who is the Operations Manager of Crisis Management Branch, United Nations Environment Program. Thank you all. I now invite Secretary Shri Nagul to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Malavika. Hello and a very good evening to one and all. Myself, Nagul Devan, Secretary of Institute of Town Planners India, Kerala Chapter. So today we are hosting the 6th session of our web talk series on the theme towards better planning and implementation. We were able to bring together experts in various domains through our prior events to render their words of wisdom and experience regarding our theme. We are fortunate today to be able to listen to an expert in the field of disaster management. Disaster management had always been considered a separate domain with respect to planning prior to the mega floods of 2018 in our state. However, the periodic disaster events has paved way for a different consideration of the same, and today we are witnessing the strategic actions undertaken in Kerala to address disaster aspects in development plans. In the light of the same, today's speaker and his discourse holds much significance for us. Our expert today is a familiar face for us. He has conveyed his ideas and wisdom to us, especially during the mega flood events, and has later played a key role in reorienting the disaster management aspects in our state. I'm delighted and honored to welcome our chief guest for today and speaker, Sri MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY, a leading expert in disaster risk management and currently functioning as operations manager in UNEP. He's a reputed expert in this domain and hails from Kerala and has immense experience in this field. It is an honor to have you as our guest for today, sir. I'm very happy to welcome our chairman, Sri J. Jayakumar, to this virtual dais. I would also like to welcome Sri Rajesh PN, Senior Town Planner, who would be moderating our QA sessions. Also, my hearty welcome to Dr. Adira Ravi, Town Planner, who would introduce us in detail, our guest, and also Sri Ramachandran, Senior Town Planner, who paved way for this web talk event. I'm also quite delighted to offer a warm welcome to all our dear participants, including the senior planners of ITPA fraternity, all ITPA members, all practicing planners, respected teachers of planning schools, all students, and each and everyone who could join us today across the country. I convey my welcome to the team behind this event, including all our executive committee members. I invite one and all for a great session today. Thank you all.
Thank you, Shri Nagul. I would like to now invite our chairman, Shri Jayakumar, to deliver the presidential address. Shri Jayakumar is currently additional Chief Town Planner at the Chief Town Planner's Office, LSDD Planning, and also Secretary, Real Estate Regulatory Authority of India. I invite you, sir, to deliver your address.
Thank you, Malavika. Chief guest and the key speaker, Sri MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY. A galaxy of leaders from the ITPA fraternity across India, starting from our senior leaders, our General Secretary, Sri Kapoor sir is here, and a galaxy of leaders are attending our meeting. Chairman and guests from other state chapters across India. Participants from various planning and related institutions. Technical staff from local self-government planning department. My team and ITPA Kerala chapter members, invited guests and friends. ITPA Kerala chapter had been functioning since the 1980s. And in the past nearly 40 years, we had been conducting 2 to 3 sessions, technical sessions every year. And from the last ITPA term, we started conducting webinars owing to the COVID situation as well as, and also with the help of our increase in the communication facilities. And this year, as soon as our committee took charge, we decided to conduct one webinar, one technical session every month. So every month, second Saturday, at the same time, we are conducting one topic. And we had 5 sessions earlier. The first one was related to zoning. Second was related to DTP schemes and its implementation, with special emphasis to Gujarat. And the third was related to planning in UAE. Fourth was related to the latest GA's advancements in the world. And the fifth one was flood mitigation planning, which is being done in Australia. And today, the topic is one with great importance in the current times. As we all know, disasters are spreading compared to the previous decades in these times, in India as well as in the world. In Kerala also, from the year 2018, we had been visualizing, we had been seeing unprecedented floods which had marked our state economy as well as our urbanization also. Also, this is one of the areas where state governments and state departments are struggling to cope up with. And also, when we look into the Kerala situation, Kerala is something like a linear state. And on one side we have on the western side we have the ocean. We have an ocean coastline with more than 500 kilometers of coastal line. Eastern side we have the mountain range where we have the environmentally fragile areas. Then we have the Paddy and Wetland Act where a lot of areas are being preserved. And we have water bodies. And the net area which is available for physical development is only less than 20% or so. So in this limited area also, some sort of these disasters are again creating a problem, and this leads to the topic, the risk-informed master plans. So the risk for each and every areas has to be identified, and in Kerala we have started that exercise, and we feel this is the right time to conduct such a talk. And very fortunately, we have a person from our own state who is an eminent personality. He has been working in the United Nations, and he had been working with the Kerala state government also during the last floods. And we are very happy to have you, sir. And we look forward to associate with you in future also. And I am not taking much of the time. Let us move on to the much awaited sessions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So for today's session, we have, as sir said, a very special guest, MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY. Someone who is not just a subject expert, but also has made his presence felt around the world and the social media space. For youngsters like us, we have seen him being very active participant, not just where he has been working, but also especially during the floods all around the world. We're very grateful to you for accepting our invitation today and being with us to share your invaluable experiences. I welcome Dr. Atira Ravi, District Town Planner, Wayanad, for introducing our chief guest for today.
Thank you, Malavika. Good evening, all. First of all, let me appreciate the ITPA Kerala chapter for organizing this webinar, Disaster Management and Risk-Informed Master Plans, which is the need of the hour. And that too with Dr. MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY, the well-known international disaster management expert and the chief of the Disaster Risk Reduction at United Nations Environment Program. We all know a hazard is a calamity of sudden happening. And when this hazard causes injury and death to a number of people and living beings during a short span of time, it becomes a disaster. And we all know that in the past, the hazards and disasters were very few and centered at few locations of the planet. But now it's common all over the world. Particularly to Kerala, we have seen the recent floods, landslides, several global warming and climate change issues. Even if the hazards are non-preventable, we humans, the patch disturbance species on the earth, are the ones triggering disasters in this planet to a certain extent. And our impact and our high ecological footprints are the root causes of these disasters. And at the same time, we are the only species who can prevent these disasters. Because of that itself, disaster management should have an integrated approach starting at the grassroots level, involving all kinds of stakeholders. As the state of Kerala is now going through the task dealing with the disaster risk-informed master plans in local bodies, which need a diverse study and conclusions from experts and stakeholders. And we have got the right person here to deliver the speech and discuss his various views and experiences in this webinar topic. I think there is no need for an introduction about our speaker, Dr. MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY. I would say Dr. MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY is a man of magic, a professional with more than 2 lakh followers in social media is really a magical one. I used to wonder how he managed people, whether it is an official, common man of all ages, politicians, entrepreneurs, whoever. And nowadays, people are looking forward at Thummarukudy's viewpoint, even in our day-to-day topics. I think we need to take from him 2 things. One is man management techniques, and the other one, the disaster management techniques. I know the time is running, so let me come to my official responsibility to welcome, to introduce our speaker, and it's my pleasure and privilege indeed. Dr. Thummarukudy, Dr. MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY is currently the Chief of Disaster Risk Reduction at United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, based in Geneva, Switzerland. He is also the Acting Head, Resilience to Disaster and Conflicts, Global Support Branch from June 2021. Proud to say he is a native of Bengola, Ernakulam district, Kerala. Dr. MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY took his civil engineering degree from MA College of Engineering, Kodamangalam in 1986. In 1988, he completed his master's in environmental engineering from IIT Kanpur. He pursued his PhD in environmental engineering from Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, and holds a diploma in environmental law from United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Dr. MURALEE was the scientist in NIRI, Nagpur during 1988-89 and joined Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in 1993. Between 1995 to 2003, MURALEE was the corporate advisor to Shell-operated oil companies in Middle East and Southeast Asia, dealing with oil-related environmental issues. Since 2003, Dr. MURALEE has been with the United Nations Environment Program. An internationally renowned expert with over 28 years of experience in the field of environment and disaster management response, Dr. MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY has been involved in post-disaster response and follow-up of almost all major disasters of the 21st century. He coordinated projects ranging from assessment to capacity building and cleanup in all over the world. As a post-crisis environment management expert, he was involved in post-disaster response and follow-up of 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, Vanchan earthquake in 2008, Cyclone Nargis in Myanmar, earthquake and hurricane in Haiti, tsunami in Japan, floods in Thailand, and earthquake in Nepal. Also, he was deployed to many countries to deal with the disasters. Dr. MURALEE has also been involved in post-conflict follow-up in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, occupied Palestine territories, Sudan, Liberia, and Ukraine. He has also shown his expertise in waste management and resource management fields. Dr. MURALEE is a member of United UN Disaster Assessment and Coordination Team. He is an alumnus of the International Leadership Academy, and he is an expert committee member of Emergency Preparedness and Response IAEA Safety Standards and member of the Advisory Committee Center for Natural Resources and Development, Technical University of Cologne. Dr. THUMMARUKUDY has published several technical papers and articles in many national and international journals. He is also a prolific writer who have published over 10 books, and MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY was awarded the Kerala Sahitya Academy Award twice for his writings. Moreover, he has excelled in many streams as a futurist, technology enthusiast, storyteller, mentor, and a public speaker. And it is very glad to hear from him recently that he will be moving to Bonn, Germany in April to take over the charge as a director of a new global initiative for restoring half of the world's degraded land by 2040. And I think that is a really challenging task, and best wishes, sir, for that project. I extend my thanks for accepting our request to give an address to this webinar, even in your busiest schedule. And once again, welcome you, sir, to this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Atira Ravi, for that very elaborate introduction. It sure is a matter of pride that Shri MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY is Nammada Sondam Malayali, and that is a profile that we can only dream of achieving and contributing to the way he's contributed to projects across the world. On that note, we move on to the part we've all been waiting for, the session by Shri THUMMARUKUDY. To all of you here, I request you all to keep your audio on mute, but please feel free to type in any questions you have for THUMMARUKUDY sir in the chat box. We will definitely be taking, he might, take sessions during the questions during the session too, but we'll definitely take questions after the presentation, which will be moderated by another one of our executive committee members and currently senior town planning with LSTD planning, Shri Rajesh PN. Before we start the session, I would also like to thank Shri UV Jose IAS sir, who is also with us today. Thank you for joining us, sir. So over to the session, disaster management and risk informed master plans. Over to you, THUMMARUKUDY sir.
Thank you, Malavika, and thank you, Adira, for a very generous introduction. I also want to thank Mr. Jayakumar, Chairman of the Kerala ITPA chapter, Mr. Negul, other senior executives of the ITPI, and I understand a number of ITPI members from other parts of the country has joined this session. So I want to thank you all for joining this evening to talk about disaster management. I want to start by mentioning one point which was touched upon by both Mr. Jayakumar and Adira. Do we have more disasters now? And if yes, why? It certainly feels like it. We certainly hear about a lot more disasters now. Now, it is possible that compared to 50 years back, we are a lot more better connected. So, like the event which happened in Kerala last week, one singular guy climbing on a mountain or a hill, getting stuck there. And this was national news. 50 years back, it would not have gone beyond that village. So it is possible that we actually have not necessarily a lot more disasters happening, but it's getting reported because media is pushing news at us all the time. So it's one question which I keep getting. And we do keep track of this as to what are the actual disasters which happened. I think it's almost since 1981 we have good numbers. And it is indeed true that we do have a lot more disasters now than before. Now, then you look back and say, do we have more earthquake now? And the answer is no, because earthquakes work on a geological time frame. So whatever a human being do doesn't create more earthquakes. So what are those disasters which are increasing? So two types of disasters are on the rise. One is what human beings themselves cause, such as an oil spill. So there are more tankers at sea, there are more factories at work, more tankers on the road, more aircrafts in the air. So statistically, so even if the rate of accident remained the same, you could have more disasters. But to be honest, actually, the rate of accident, even though the number of ships in the sea, number of aircrafts there are going up, the rate of accident has been coming down. So there is no significant increase in what we call the technological disasters. So where is this increase coming from? Yesterday only, we were looking at some of the latest data on disasters. And 87% of the disasters we are now dealing with are one way or other related to climate. Hurricanes, heat waves, floods, droughts. So climate-induced disasters are certainly on the rise. But not only the number of disasters are on the rise, there are more people affected, more property being damaged. This is also true, statistically speaking. And we address why. Why is this happening? One reason, clearly, is that there are a lot more people now in the planet than, say, 100 years back. So if you took a flood in 1924, which happened in Kerala, or let's say 1918, which happened in Chennai, and then you compare with the flood happened in 2015 in Chennai and 2018 in Kerala, even if the extent of the flood was the same, there are 4 times as many people in that affected area. So clearly more people will be affected and therefore the death will be high. It's also true that we are a lot more wealthy now compared to 100 years back. So if you assume that 10% of all the motor vehicles in Kerala got washed off in the flood which happened in 1924, that probably would have meant 1 car got washed off because we probably had less than 10 cars in Kerala at that time. But come 2018, and if 10% of the car got washed off, then we are talking about 200,000 cars. So we are a lot more people, a lot more wealthy. So that's certainly one reason. But is that the only reason? And this is where the importance of interface with planning is coming up. For those of us who work in the disaster management domain, a disaster is almost a mathematical equation with 3 variables. First variable is the hazard. So that could be an earthquake, that could be a flood, a cyclone. So that's a hazard, one part of the equation. The second part of the equation is the vulnerability of the people who are getting exposed, which is, is it happening in a place where already there's a conflict ongoing so that there's no institutional support? a place which is not rich, so that they don't have enough ability to rebuild, or a place without enough hospitals, so that even if the same number of people die, a number of people are injured, more people will die in a place which has no hospital. So that's a vulnerability equation. And then comes the most important part of the equation, which is called exposure. So the same hazard could expose more or less people in a place. So let's say if you had an earthquake in the Saudi Arabian desert, where there are hardly any people, and we had the same earthquake in Mumbai, even if the magnitude is the same, it exposed a lot more people, and therefore it would affect, kill a lot more people, and also a lot more property. And this is the most important element in the disaster equation. And this is why the magnitude of loss has been rising dramatically in the last 50 years. Because the number of people who are, not only the number of people are increasing globally, which it is, but that they are concentrating into more and more urban areas across the world. And often when a city grows, that grows into most of the vulnerable areas of the city. So take Delhi, for example. The growth of Delhi over the last 50 years, if you look from the time of Asia, has been in the floodplains of Yamuna. So not only there are more people, they are living in areas which are potentially exposed to a flood. You look at the infrastructure we have created, has also been created in areas which are vulnerable. So it is this exposure part which is creating maximum casualties, maximum loss of money, and that is the equation where we have a lot more control over. When we say we, society, and of course the town planners, the planners are the front end of that. So it is the duty of the planners to understand what exposure people are going to have, infrastructure is going to have, and be informed about the potential risks. And then try to do whatever it is possible to reduce the risk, reduce the exposure. And if that's not possible, you do what it is needed to reduce the risk. For example, you could be in a very earthquake-prone area. So there are two possibilities. One, you move the people out of the earthquake-prone area. Number two, you build better buildings, because it's well known that it is not earthquakes which kill people. People are killed by buildings. So you could have a town which is extremely vulnerable to earthquakes, such as Tokyo, but built in such a way that doesn't kill people. I was in Haiti in 2010, I think it's in January. They had an earthquake of magnitude 7.2 in Port-au-Prince, their capital. It lasted 36 seconds and it killed 216,000 people. The total population of Haiti is 10 million. So you can imagine the magnitude of that earthquake. And within a month, there was another earthquake in Chile, which was 8.5. And as you know, the earthquake scale is between 7 and 8, the multiplication factor is 30. So if you have an earthquake of 7.2 versus 8.5, you are talking probably about a 300 times magnitude multiplier earthquake. And it killed 480 people. So you could plan not by moving people out, but by building differently. But again, something which planners can work on. But it is this absolutely critical role planners have. When we talk about disaster risk reduction, we always say the most and the only sustainable way of disaster risk reduction is reducing exposure by better planning. In disaster management, disaster response field, we say a plan is nothing. Planning is everything. The act of bringing people together, the act of thinking about the risk. In an actual disaster situation, your well laid out contingency plan will not work to the plan. It's a well-known fact. It's also said in the military terminology that the best plans will be destroyed on the first contact with the enemy. But planning is everything. Thinking through. But in the field of disaster management, not in disaster response, disaster prevention, plan is everything. It is not good enough that we have gone through an act of planning unless the plan is there and followed. It's not just important that you have a plan, it has to be followed. One of my most interesting examples of plan and planning come from Japan. In 2011, Japan had this absolutely major earthquake. I think it was close to 9. 9 is like absolutely humongous force earthquake. One of the strongest earthquake we have had in recent time. They were even calculating how much the earth has moved from its axis due to that earthquake, that type of force. And it unleashed the tsunami. And I'd been to this place. The tsunami went up to 48 meters, 16-story high building. It's that big, it's unimaginable. 23,000 Japanese lost their life, 18,000 bodies they could recover, 5,000 they could not, but presumed dead. That's the single biggest casualty after the Second World War for Japan. And as we were reviewing this disaster, we were asking, how could this happen in Japan? Japan, as you know, extremely well prepared. This huge earthquake happened. And I think only 3 people died of that from the earthquake part. 99.99% of the death happened from the tsunami. So how could this happen? The reason why this happened is because the planning they had at that point of time, the plans they had, not the planning, the plans they had were not informed by the potential risk they could face, such as a tsunami. They knew the tsunami could come, but they did not anticipate the magnitude of that tsunami. Now, this is one problem with tsunami. Tsunamis happened once in 500 years or once in 1,000 years. For example, in Indian coast, tsunami happened in 2004. Was there any tsunami before that? In Malayalam, we don't even have a word for tsunami, which actually meant that since Malayalam was born, we haven't had tsunami. So that's at least 1,500 years. Possibly we haven't had a tsunami. So tsunamis come extremely rare. So the next generation, and it is also well known that people forget about the disaster essentially after one generation. So in about 30 to 50 years, a disaster is forgotten, unlike conflicts, which are remembered for thousands of years. We all remember the first war of Panipat and the second war of Panipat, much before the Alexander's war. But when it comes to disasters which happened even in 20th century in India, if you ask an average Indian student, they wouldn't know. Or any student in any part of the world. And so when you have a disaster which has a repeat cycle of hundreds of years, people just won't remember. But Japanese had actually evolved a technology for that. They actually used to plant a stone at the end point where the last tsunami came. It was called the tsunami stone. And tsunami stone was their planning tool. So if a city wanted to build or a village wanted to build, they did not build between the tsunami stone and the sea, because they knew that area is vulnerable to disaster. So they built behind this stone, which was meant to be safe. It was a planning tool. But what happened in this particular 2000 Sunday tsunami was that they did not have a particular stone, but they actually had a tsunami temple, which was about 5 kilometers inland from the coast. And it was called a tsunami temple. It's called Namiwake temple. I had been there. And it was founded about 1,100 years back. And they have a stone which says it was 1,100 years back. The tsunami came in 1,100 years back, and it stopped. And then people started praying there. But years after, decades after, centuries after, people continue to go to this temple and pray. But nobody believed that story anymore. Because would a tsunami come 5 kilometers inland? So imagine Kerala coastline in Ernakulam. Would a tsunami come all the way to the Ernakulam bypass? This is the type of distance the tsunami traveled. And people started believing that this must be old grandmothers and grandfathers telling stories which are exaggerated. So building started happening, and gradually it went all the way to the coastline. But unfortunately, the tsunami came. And this time the tsunami only came 2.5 kilometers inland, 2.5 kilometers, only half of the distance of what the temple markings said. And still it killed 23,000 people. I was there after the tsunami, I think a few days after tsunami, and we were looking at massive, unprecedented devastation. Housing, schools, train stations, factories, totally devastated. Then we understood what is risk-informed planning. If we do not plan our infrastructure, our schools, our hospitals, then we have a problem. Absolutely clear. Nature has almost drawn a line of a no man's land almost. Now, Japan is not a country which has a lot of land. It's almost like Kerala. The land, the hill, so that the actual amount of land available for planning is very little. And the Japanese had to replan their urban areas in the tsunami hit places. So what did they do? So they have now created a planning paradigm which reversed the sequence. So normally, people had their houses closest to the sea, absolutely beautiful views of the beach, the sea, and as you know, the sea view houses always have a premium. And then behind that, they had schools because children could walk to schools. And then they had hospitals. Behind that, they had factories, and behind they had farms. But after the tsunami, they reversed the paradigm. They said, right in the front end, we will have our farms. Maximum areas exposed. If the tsunami comes, it washes over our crops. But people will not die. Very few, if any farmers are there, but then they will be able-bodied, they'll be able to move out. Behind that, we'll have our industrial area, where again, able-bodied people will be there, and they can be provided with proper warning and they could be trained. Behind that, they will have the housing areas. And behind that, you will have the schools, old age homes, things like that. Because our future, which is children, old age home are most vulnerable. They should be most protected and behind. That's the paradigm shift which happened. Now, 2018, we suffered floods in Kerala. And Kerala is not unique. We suffered 2014 in Chennai, 2013 in Uttarakhand, and Delhi keep having 1978, 1980, 81, I think, or 80, and many. Mumbai, I think in 2012. We keep having floods, and it will increase more and more. And the lessons are pretty much clear. Water, as you know, keep level. And historically, floods will always come back. This is all well known to us. So the fact that we should be planning risk informed for flood is what we call a no-brainer. But we often don't manage to do it. Not only that we don't manage to do it, we almost try to erase our memory, individually as well as collectively. After 2018 floods in Kerala, I had suggested that the location where the floods came should be marked in every house and at least in every public building. Because when I started researching floods in Kerala in 2012, I could not get any indication of the floods which happened in 1924, which was the biggest flood before 28. I asked many people, then I put a public post, and eventually I located 3 points. One was in a church in Malayatur. One was in a private house in Indamalayar, and one was a temple near Paravur. In each of these locations, when you actually went and stood there, you actually shook your hand and said, no, this is very unlikely that the flood would have come this far or this high, because it was. But this time, it came back almost to the same level, actually just 1 feet down, 1 feet below. So I said, we should mark this for our future generations, so that they are risk informed. I think it was agreed, and there's even a government order to that effect. But people did not want that to be marked. The reason why they did not want to be marked is that because if it was marked, the price of their property will go down. The price of that land will go down. People did not want. Now what happens? Right now, in Kerala and Chennai, I'm sure in Uttarakhand, when people advertise for their property, they do actually put, this was not affected by 2018 flood or 2014 flood in Chennai. They advertise it because they know that it has a premium. But very soon, this memory will be lost. Maybe in 20 years, maybe in 30 years. Collective memory of the society that we had a massive event in 2018 will be lost. And the flood will come back. And this time it won't take 100 years. The climate is changing. And you will see the same flood coming back possibly in 40 years. And we'll see bigger floods. And then what happens is that all this valuable property, which we preserved and handed over to our children and our grandchildren, will once again be their graveyard. And this is why I said plan is everything. Because unless these are recorded and documented, official documents, that when somebody actually go to build a house, plan a road, plan a railway, plan an airport, and if it is implied, indicated in the plan, that this area was affected by flood, will be affected by earthquake. Is in the path, it's in the possible path of a cyclone, could be potentially affected by tsunami. They would invest their savings into that area, and they will build it the way they want to build. And in doing so, they will magnify their individual risk as well as society's collective risk. So much so that when someone like you, your team, the town planners, come and start to retell them that, look, this area is vulnerable, they will start to aggressively resist your effort at planning, because they have already sunk their money, their future, their children's future into it. And this is why your task is so unenviable, because you are trying to do good for the society, but the society really don't want to hear your message. And they will try to do almost everything to undermine your efforts because of their very short-term interest, which is completely understandable. But then you have this responsibility to the society, like engineers have. Our job is not to tell the people what they want to hear. Our job is to tell them what, in our professional judgment, is good for the society. And we owe it to them because we are all educated at their cost to serve them. So just because it is not good for them, that will be pushed back by them, we should not stop saying this. I will come to this new initiative going on in Netherlands. It's called Making Space for Water or Room for the River project. As you all know, Netherlands, part of Netherlands, there are areas below sea level. And they had built massive dikes to keep the sea out of that area. And in those areas which have been liberated from the sea, protected from the, and if you look at 17th century and 18th century, some of the biggest disasters, which killed 100,000 people were from Netherlands. And they of course, perfected the engineering, and they sheltered the land. And behind that shelter, people start to proliferate. They start to build their houses. They start to build their property, invest their factories, colleges, universities, nursery schools. They started doing all this. Now, they know the climate is changing, that you cannot any longer continue to build their land, at least not all land. This is something which they know. Now, here are two options. One is to continue to believe that we could engineer out of this problem. Many people do that. That's easy because there will be a lot of public support for it. You can say, read about this in Venice, for example. They are trying to build an absolutely massive engineering structure that in case of a massive tsunami wave coming, they could operate it and stop it from hitting the city. The other way is to plan, keeping a 100-year horizon in future. And if you plan a 100-year horizon, you will see some of these areas cannot be defended, at least reasonably defended. Of course, anything can be defended, provided you put sufficient money into it. But is that money has an opportunity cost? So is that the best way of using that money? So that's where planning comes. In Kerala, we have Kuttanad, where There are historical reasons why Kuttanad happened. Poor country, shortage of food grain. So you started farming in an area which is not really suitable for farming. But we had no other choice, which is also the case in Netherlands. And people work hard. They created an entire farming infrastructure. And there are now people living there, hundreds of thousands of people living there. And they are protected by few bunds. And now, increasingly, 2018, we all remember the big floods in Ernakulam, Chalakudy. The floods actually started in Alappuzha. And people are underwater almost for 2 months before the big flood came in other parts of Kerala. And even after the big floods washed out, end of August, Kuttanad was still underwater. And in 2019, and in 2020, and 21 and 22. People are suffering in those areas. Floods, because the water level is rising, the water is not draining. And this will become an annual feature. Yesterday, day before yesterday, I was reading about Ernakulam, where people are almost perpetually living in water. This again will become an annual feature. That more than 30 days in a month, maybe 40 days in a month, many parts of Ernakulam will be underwater. According to the modeling by Climate Central, if you look, and this is publicly available data, you could have up to 1/3 of Ernakulam underwater due to sea level rise by 2070. And if you put that model in Kuttanad, which again is available in public domain, you can actually see that Kuttanad cannot be defended. This is not an easy message. So therefore, we could start to work, engineer out of the problem. And you would almost certainly fail, or certainly invest much disproportionate amount of society's resources, which has a huge opportunity cost. The alternative is to plan. So what did they do in Netherlands? They opened up certain areas. They allowed the water to come in, or they are going to allow the water to come in. And this was not easy. Netherlands is a democratic country. So nobody could be asked to leave their place. So you have to negotiate with that community by community, convince them, use good science, give them alternatives. So it's not that you're told you cannot live in this place. What will you do? Give them incentives to move. Create some sort of a structure whereby those who lose benefit and they are able to resettle elsewhere. It is time that we have to start to plan like this. And this is not just about Kuttanad. Kuttanad I'm just giving as an extreme example of a place where we are currently living in this illusion that somehow we can engineer out of the situation. We can't. We will have this problem in Ernakulam. We'll have this problem in Mumbai. We'll have this problem in Delhi. That as the climate is changing, as the flood become more and more frequent, many areas where people live, many of our infrastructure, interstate bus terminals, or railway stations, some of our airports, these will all become areas which have been planned without sufficient understanding of the risk and will have to be relocated. And that thinking should start now, that planning should start now, and the plan should start now. As a minimum, there should be no further investment in those areas which are likely to be affected by a changing climate by 2070. Because we already know this. Now, if we wait for 2070 to happen and we build our new airport in that area, time will come like that. You often believe that, let's say, when we talk about 2050 is so far ahead in time that we, certainly from an official point of view, many of you think that you would be out of the government service for sure. But if you look at reality of the situation, how fast 2050 can come to you. So this is going to be just 28 years from now, would be 2050. Imagine 28 years back, and that was 1994, and most of you will remember that 1994 was not that far. So the future will come to you much faster than what you think it will. So your plans has to be ready now and not ready in 2050, 2060. And I know it's not your fault that we do not have good plans. You already mentioned that there are tremendous vested interest at play, and not vested interest not in a very negative way. It's just that people have vested their interest in the status quo because they were not planned in 1950. Things which should have happened in 1970 did not happen, and therefore people already invested. Now, if we don't plan now, people will be investing till 2050. That makes it even more difficult to change the plan. So the more time we give for non-risk informed planning, more investment will happen in that area. I know it's not easy, especially in a democracy, to have only engineering, only science be the base of all decision. It has to be a negotiated outcome. I know it. I know in cities, land values extremely high. Any planning decision you make people millionaires and millionaires into ordinary people. So it will be resisted, especially those people who are currently millionaires and therefore have a prevailing influence over the decisions of that city. But this is where we have to leverage on one side on the power of science, one side the power of consultation. And certainly we have to show people with other examples from other places where things are done different. And if you do that, we cannot expect all people from all the towns in India or Kerala to fall in line immediately. But there will be champions who would see this. A mayor in Mumbai, for example, a chief minister in Delhi, for example. There will be somebody who will see the value and who will be able to lead their people. You would have watched the movie Invictus, which is about Nelson Mandela, where the entire sports association have made one decision and he wants to change that decision. And he said, "You have chosen me your leader. Now it's my time to lead." So you will have to identify these champions, be it a district panchayat president, be it a mayor, be it an MLA. And through them, they are much better at negotiating with the people than we engineers, town planners, or scientists are. But we have to use science. We have to provide that scientific basis. There are more and more tools now. Satellite images gives a perception to people that they never had. Mathematical models are more perfect than ever. Visuals coming from around the world are more stunning than ever. Scientists are more convinced and more confident to attribute disasters to climate change rather than saying climate change is, and this disaster cannot be attributed or that. So we have to work together to have our plans ready. We have to work together with insurance. We have to work together with bankers. We have to work together with political parties. Young people. It is young people's future we are setting up. In Europe, it is the young people who are setting the agenda now. Greta Thunberg, less than 20 years old. It is that generation which is setting the agenda. So we have to reach out to them. How do we reach out to the young people? To talk to them about urban planning, the importance of urban planning, the fact that their parents, by sticking to the status quo, they are putting their life and their future at danger. We have to work on these things. I would stop at this point, and I will take questions. I have about 20-25 minutes, so I'll be very happy to take any questions during this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that wonderful session. It's not that easy to keep people captivated without visuals, but you did that. We all enjoyed your examples from around the world, a lot from Kerala itself. I'm sure we all have a lot to ask him. I can see the chat boxes are getting filled as I speak. So I'm now handing over the dice to Rajesh, sir, a moderator for the day. Sir, please.
Thank you, sir. It was a very enlightening session. Actually, there was a lot of information which we would like, as planners, we actually, in the department also is trying to prepare risk-informed master plans for the state. So, as I just mentioned earlier, that we have already done some pilot studies. Now, we are in the stage of preparation of guidelines for it. You have very correctly mentioned that investment in risk areas actually will lead to more exposure and more people are getting vulnerable to it. Our idea is basically to understand and the hazard, and then what is the probability of the hazard, which turns into the risk factor of that, and to make plans accordingly. There is no dearth of technology on preparation of plans. If there is a will, we can prepare a plan, a very beautiful plan. But how to make people understand and how to get into that, we have actually, after doing two pilot studies, we understood that how to go to the people. Though Kerala, I think in the all over India, I think Kerala is one of the states where we have a lot of people participation in most of the plan preparation and the process. So government also is thinking about involvement of more people participation in it. Now we understood that there is a democratic process to it. So as a part of preparation of these risk-informed master plan, in the initial stages itself, there we are planning for a sensitization and other methods of making people more confident and to understand the risk actually involved. So that, like you have clearly mentioned, this is the area where you have a risk. So be prepared for this, so that we are aware that this much problem will be there. So that in case there is a time it is available, so people can be made ready and more resilient towards that purpose. And as a part of the other study, we are also looking at into climate tools for and information education and dissemination of these informations to understand how people should be quickly aware about the problems. Now we have a few questions actually from various participants. Mr. Kiran Kumar has mentioned statutory planners in this group. The implementation of statutory plans in India is how we can improve the situation. Actually, basically that actually statutory plans have been a very big hurdle, in the preparation of these risk-informed master plans. We already had a very short session in the master plan, the act also before the amendment, saying that we have to take projects into that. That is what we have taken a step in that area. Pradeep Kapoor sir has asked about, in India, even the disaster risk areas is marked in the plan. Still, economic consideration of land take a front seat rather than the anticipated risk. CRZ is subject to change in political bosses under the real estate pressure, real estate greed. How the risk-informed planning and government policies in environment can be related. You can throw some light onto that.
Yeah, thank you. I would. I have been looking into the chat box, and I will answer some of them. But others, please feel free to continue to type your questions. Now, this question about, the experts makes plans, And then for political reasons or other reasons, it is override by the administrators. How do we deal with a situation like this? Now, my suggestion on this is the following. Information is the biggest power here. When we try to tell people that we have a problem because you are in a CRZ zone violation or a paddy wetland against the Paddy Wetland Act, then because of the nature of governance which we are used to, all that we are trying to look into is the legal aspect of it. How do we work around it? We get a legal exemption to that. And then, obviously, sometimes money changes hands, sometimes it is political influence, etc. So the CRZ, for example, moves up from 50 meter to 200 meter back to 50 meter, etc. And this is because people understand this as some sort of a legal problem. They don't understand that the root of this is not a man-made law, but something which has to do with the risks which are physical, which doesn't change by an act of the parliament or the legislation or the city planners. If the tsunami came 5 kilometers, the tsunami will always come back 5 kilometers. The government can allow buildings to be built up to 50 meters close to the beach. That's the government's prerogative. But tsunami don't care. The nature don't care. It will come back. If people get that message, more often than not, what I have noticed is that some of this information, absolutely valuable information, are not put in public domain because we keep some sort of confidential information is power. Even when the information is available with one government department, is not shared with another government department, and so on. For example, we already know with fair accuracy as to what sea level rise would do to Indian coastline by 2050, 2070, 2100. Now, a person who is planning to build an apartment or buy a plot of land or buy an apartment, they may not know this. I know this. As a scientist, I have access. But that person may not have an access. And all that they know is that, okay, I have a CRZ, I have to work around it. But if they had this scientific information and what it means, people are not stupid. They would change their behavior. So the first one is to make the information available to the actual person who is making their investment. The second line is to target those who deal with real estate. So one is a primary investor. The second one is those who are dealing with the real estate. The third one is those who deal with insurance and banking. They have to understand that these risks are real. That if you put your money into an apartment which is coming up in this area, not because it's CRZ safe or CRZ otherwise, this is going to be underwater and your money will be underwater. They will get it. So we have to work at both levels. On one level, we have to work with our government systems so that they hold the line closer to the science, not close to the public opinion. On the other side, we have to work on those whose money is at stake so that they make the right investment or resist from the wrong investment. Thank you. There is a question which I often get. That's why I will take it. This is about Kerala. Can we bring the type of planning which is existing in Netherlands, in this case, to Kerala, where land is scarce, is the question. And I get it all the time, that Kerala land is scarce. This is what we think. Now, I tell people that if you take Kerala from about in this century, for example, we have an opposite problem, that land is getting liberated at an unprecedented rate. It is right in front of us. We just don't see it. For example, in 1960s, we had 800,000 hectares of paddy field. In 2010, it dropped below 200,000 hectares of paddy field. It has marginally gone up now with the effort of the government to start to cultivate paddy. But still, it's not above 300,000, it's about 240,000. What does it mean? It means that we have liberated 550,000 to 600,000 hectares of land from active land use. It's there. It's there for us to plan. It's not necessarily for us to build, but it is there for us to plan. For example, if you were to think of a sponge city, which is the new concept in China to manage floods, that every city should have a peri-urban area which can absorb the flood. This 600,000 hectares is available for you to plan around it. And you look at land in Kerala to build. Kerala population is, Kerala's in total fertility rate, which fallen below the replacement ratio of 2.1 already in the 1990s. Now it's about 1.6, which means that in the long run, the Kerala population is going to decrease, not increase. Kerala has, according to 2011 census, 1.1 million houses and apartments lying vacant. This is a lot more than every person who doesn't have a house in Kerala. So it's not that we need a lot more housing to accommodate the people. We actually have more houses than what we actually need, even now. Farming across the board, from rubber to coconut to almost anything, is no longer economical. You go across the country, what used to be actively farmed areas are not being farmed at all. The land is there, but nobody is farming it. Rubber estate not being tapped across the state. So the land is there. The problem is that we have this perception that the land is not there, and therefore this sense of scarcity. But the moment this mindset change, that we do not need to cater for a rising population to build new houses, and as you also know, Kerala is heavily being urbanized, and the housing is going to go more vertical than horizontal. That we do not need all this land, neither for farming, nor for housing, nor for everything else. The price of land will collapse, which I expect to happen. And when that happens, you will see land all over the place. People will have nowhere. I wish that happens sooner than later, so that the planners have a better chance to plan. Because so long as the land price remains high, people will see land as their investment, as their insurance. Then any effort to bring planning, which actually means restrictions in their land use, to be actively, aggressively, from a legal means, or by political means, by standing in front of any effort to plan, like what is happening in the Kerala, people will be resisting it. So I, for one, believe that there's no shortage of land in Kerala, and planning on a 100-year horizon is absolutely possible. This is what I believe. Thank you.
Sir, actually a few more points. One point was with respect to whether we can have our disaster management plan prepared dynamically. Before going to that, I'll just add one more point. Like you have correctly mentioned, department has done a very detailed study on what is the density of population, whether the urban sprawl is required. We found that even the Kochi is not densely populated. So we have a lot of land. It is just a farce which we are creating that there is no land for people. We have plenty of land, and the population growth rate is going to be negative. And for Kerala, that is a good sign. Like we have the next census, we will have population growth again going down, which is a very good factor for making us more sustainable and resilient for climate action plans. So dynamically, whether the disaster management plans can be prepared and how it can be incorporated for information dissemination onto the general public.
Kerala, the risk profile of Kerala is changing. Actually, when I started writing about disasters in Kerala in 2008, there was hardly any takers because Kerala was supposed to be safe. Cyclones which happened in Andhra, earthquakes happened in Japan, tsunamis. Probably that's the only thing which happened, but killed 173 people in 2004, but never before, never after. It was considered a freak incident. But since the Oki of 2017 and then the floods of 2018 and the landslides of 2019, now we consider us to be a little bit more vulnerable. So clearly there's a room for a dynamic planning paradigm. And I think all plans should be dynamic, both disaster management plan as well as urban plan should be dynamic. But the problem of urban plan being dynamic is that it then gives people a false impression. It's almost like the CRISES situation. That if people feel that things can be pushed backward, they will push backward because their immediate interest is in pushing backwards. And this is the bane of urban planning in India. Every town in Kerala and rest of India had been to almost all states in India. Hardly any proper planning goes into it. Even a marginal change such as a traffic diversion becomes an interface of a political and an economic interest, because there will be some winners and some losers. And if the winners are more powerful, even if there are more people benefiting by the move, that will be thwarted. So my thinking in these areas is that some of these things, we have to follow good science, even if it's not popular, even if that's not going to benefit the majority, but if it is going to benefit the people in the long run. There's a time scale element to it. So yes, plans can be dynamic, but what is also needed is that we need to always take people into confidence. It's not necessarily that they agree with it, but they fully understand it. I know it's not very easy. There are, first of all, there are, how do we reach out to all the people? Who speaks for people? Vested interest, violence. So there are all sort of, I'm not at all saying it's easy. But if we get one Manadavadi or one Changanur, and then those people benefit a little bit better than the other unplanned places, slowly others will fall in line. There's always a difficulty to get a first mover. I have to leave in about 4 minutes. So I can probably take a last question or you can conclude. Thank you.
Sir, we can have an open question, 2 questions from anybody. There was another question we have all made. Okay. Any questions from the participants? 2 questions can be allowed, so that very briefly, so that he can, sir can just.
I think Jamal had a question.
Jamal, can we have all major projects, both government and private, to pass through a sieve of disaster preparedness, either through State Disaster Management Authority or LSG? I think it says.
Yes, thank you. No, absolutely. I think it should be the case. Actually, European Union in 2017 amended their environmental impact assessment legislation to include disasters into it. And this is exactly what we should be doing. That we should have all our major investment projects evaluated. Right now, what happens is the opposite. When we plan a major facility, what disasters that facility will cause to the surrounding environment is part of the analysis. But the opposite is not. And this is why when I went to Thailand in 2010, they had built exactly like in Kerala, paddy field, they had Nissan factories and Toyota factories and 500 other factories. And it all got flooded because they had planned factory to outside disaster, but not backward. So yes, it should be a part of this for sure. Thank you.
We have actually our Chief Town Planner Pramod also assist in the whether Pramod can you can just deliberate on. Pramod, are you there? Otherwise, we'll take some 2 questions from the participants if there is any.
Yes, I can see someone called Farid Baba Khan.
Yeah.
Have his hands raised here.
I would like to have your valued opinion on the proposal to include disaster management in schools and colleges curriculum. What is your valuable opinion on that, please?
No, thank you. Absolutely. My own feeling always is that we should have a new safety culture. So, let's say in Europe and in many of the Western world, the first hour of the first class when a school opens is about safety lessons. So, a child comes to school, which is a uncertain environment. There are hazards in every school, including the school bus, and therefore they're trained. How do you deal with that one? And if something happens, whom should they inform? If an injury happens, who will do the first aid? They're all trained on the first day, first hour. And then every year, there are other trainings and so on and so on. Now, when I have been saying this for at least 15 years in Kerala, and you can check this, almost every year on the first day the school start, I'm sitting in Geneva, June 1, June 2, June 3. Invariably, there's a death of 1 or 2 students in Kerala every year. Something happened, some small, old well in the school, or a coconut falling on a kid, a tree falling on a bus which was parked. Always happens. Because we assume that disasters is not something which happened in this school, not to my kid, and so on. So yes, absolutely, it should be part of the curriculum, starting from day 1. And then once safety becomes a habit, then we are certainly much, much better prepared to deal with disasters, big and small.
Thank you.
Our Pradeep
General
Kapoor,
Secretary, our General Secretary Pradeep Kapoor sir had a question. I think it is partially answered, it seems. Kapoor sir.
So it was not a question, it was my observation. It's not exactly the question.
Your observation is right.
We are in a democratic country, and we know that how much political pressure is there. And of course, there's a pressure group of real estate, particularly in urban areas. It's very difficult to handle that. So, I don't know how to address to that.
Yes.
Because we cannot change our political system.
Yes, sir. Arun Shourie is somebody whom I read all the time, and he speaks very nicely. So he once, when we were in IIT, he once told us that in India, breakthrough always happen when we have a breakdown. Okay, so not before. So if you look at some of the best planned places, it's always after disaster. So Surat got cleaned up after disaster. Chennai, now the waterways are absolutely cleaned right in time for the flood because they had a disaster. Now, unfortunately, one of these will happen in every place. In Delhi, for example, a major flood would happen. This is like, when I say this, I don't say this with any happiness. I know it's like a train is coming, the person is standing on the track, it will be hit. Delhi has planned so much of its infrastructure in Yamuna floodplain that there will be major consequences. At that point of time, none of the political influence will help because the nature don't respect any political influence. No amendment act. No, nature.
That's true, but our memory is so short.
Correct. And then we'll rebuild.
When something
I was told in Uttarakhand after the flood, flash flood, people wanted to go and rebuild exactly the same place as before. So, this is, let's say this is one of the, something which comes in the package of democracy. And it's not that democracy cannot plan better. Other countries which are democratic also do planning, but it's certainly more challenging than, let's say, somewhere else where somebody could draw a line.
We have to wait for maturity of our democracy.
It's a challenge which I understand, and that's why you have an unenviable path.
Nice talk.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Any short questions somebody can have?
Yeah. So I've actually typed it, but I'll just read through that. Just mention that. See, actually, the Dr. Muralee, the IPCC IGP has have said that extreme climatic events will be occurring, or more than one, and actually in cities including Kochi in its 6th report. Now, small countries in Asia Pacific actually have started reaching out to multilateral funding agencies for coastal reinforcement and taking care of their coastal line. So, in that background, with respect to Kochi and the Kerala belt, shouldn't we start working now itself? What do you feel, especially with respect to our Marine Drive and other places? And you just mentioned that within 5 kilometers is the Kochi bypass. So what do you see in these lines? Should we start working on this right now?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about this. We should have started working in 1990, 2000. At least we should work now. I'll give you one example. I keep giving this. We know 1/3 of Kochi would be uninhabitable in about 50 years. It's not that it will be fully underwater. Is that now it will be underwater. Now if it's underwater for about 30 days, about 2 weeks, it will be underwater for about 45 days, which means that normally you cannot have a housing there. So what do we do in such a situation? You have to, we already know which part of Kochi is most vulnerable. So we have to start to depopulate that area. Now you cannot draw a line and ask people to move. This is a democracy, as Kapoor sir was saying. But we have to give the signal to the people. And then we also have to ensure that government don't do major investment in these areas which are most vulnerable. Because if anything we invest now, we have to protect more. I keep giving this example. Take Ernakulam General Hospital. Right next to the sea. This is a critical infrastructure. If something happens in Kochi, General Hospital in Kochi is going to be the most important place where people will have to come and look after, etc. Now, this is a very vulnerable place, which is very likely to be flooded. And once it's flooded, you have a double problem. Not only the hospital is flooded, but the urban response is going to be affected. So if I were in charge, I had the absolute freedom to make decisions. the first thing I do is not to invest any more money in any buildings or other things in that hospital. I'll build a hospital annex, probably on the other side of Cochin bypass. All the new investment would be there. And then in due course, you shift the old hospital outside the Kochi city. Then you liberate land. That land you can either create into a sponge city, or you do for something where people are not permanently vulnerable and not the most vulnerable people are there. So if you think creatively like that, you can climate proof our cities. No, it's not that all Kochi has to move, but Kochi has to create an infrastructure, an absorption capacity for increased water. And Cochin population have to know that their investment is they are making is vulnerable. So, and that's needed for every city, but Cochin in particular.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful session. We couldn't have asked for a better guest or a better audience. Just reminding you that we had shared a feedback form in the chat box. So we would love to hear what you think of these sessions and what you would like to hear in the coming sessions. And to mark an official end to today's meeting, I invite Shri Kiranchand Vayat, Treasurer, to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Malavika. So indeed, first of all, good evening to all. So indeed, it was a great evening for us for having such an eminent personality for gracing this event. First of all, I thank Sri Dr. MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY for giving his insights on disaster management and risk-informed planning. And also thank him for taking his time out of his busy schedule to grace this event. Thank you, sir. And now I thank Pradeep Kapoor, sir, General Secretary ITPI, for being part of this event. Thank you, sir. Then I would like to thank Sri Jayakumar, sir, for conducting this event and giving us an opportunity for attending this event. Thank you, sir. Then also I would like to thank UV Jose IAS for being part of this event. Thank you, sir. Then also I thank Rajesh, sir, for wonderfully moderating this event. Thank you, sir. Then I'd also like to thank Dr. Adira Ravi for her kind introduction of our esteemed guest. Thank you, ma'am. I would also like to thank all the technical institutions, ITPI members, ITPI Executive Committee members for being part of this event and supporting us for all the events which have been throughout this year. So once again, I would like to thank from my bottom of my heart, from my side and also from ITPI Kerala chapter side for being part of this event and keep supporting us. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Kiran, and thank you all for joining us from around the country and I'm sure from across the world. Special thanks to MURALEE THUMMARUKUDY, sir, for your time and that very engaging session. We will have more of such experts joining us in the coming months as part of our webinar series towards better planning and implementation. And we hope to see all of you here and your colleagues and your friends. And we'll be sharing the details soon. Again, reminding you all to fill the feedback form. Till next time, I hope you all stay safe, healthy, and wish you all a very good night and wish MURALEE sir a very good rest of the day. Thank you once again, all of you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.